Imagine this. It's a Saturday afternoon somewhere in Southern California. The sun is hammering down on a long stretch of flat black asphalt. The air smells like burnt rubber, motor oil, and raw gasoline. Men in rolled-up jeans and white t-shirts are pushing motorcycles to the starting line. Women in circle skirts are standing on the sidelines watching. And the crowd, hundreds of them, are pressed up against ropes, leaning forward, waiting. A starter raises his flag. Two machines sit side by side, engines ticking, riders hunched low. And then, bang, they're gone. In under 10 seconds, the race is over. The winner raises a fist. The crowd roars. And that winning machine, that screaming, fire-breathing, tire-shredding machine, is not American. It's not a Harley-Davidson. It's not an Indian. It's a Triumph. Made in Coventry, England. And on this strip, on this day, in this era, that was not unusual. That was just Tuesday. Today we're going back to one of the most fascinating and forgotten chapters in motorcycle history. The era when British bikes completely dominated American drag strips. When Triumph, BSA, and Norton came across the Atlantic Ocean and beat America at its own game, on its own soil, in front of its own crowds. This is not just a story about fast motorcycles. This is a story about culture, about identity, about the rebels and the working men who turned a stretch of empty road into a battlefield, and the British iron that ruled it for over a decade. Let's get into it. To understand why British bikes dominated, you first have to understand where drag racing came from, because it did not come from a racetrack. It did not come from some organized motorsport federation sitting in a fancy office deciding the rules. It came from the street. After World War II, America had a very specific problem. Hundreds of thousands of young men had come home from the war. They had spent years living on adrenaline, on danger, on the edge of life and death every single day. And now they were home. And America was peaceful. And peaceful was boring. These men needed speed. They needed competition. They needed something that made their heart pound the way combat did. So they went to the dry lake beds. They went to the salt flats. And most importantly, they went to the road. Illegal street racing exploded across America in the late 1940s. Two guys pulling up at a red light, revving their engines, and going. It was dangerous. It was chaotic. It was completely out of control, and the police hated it. So in 1950, a man named C.J. Hart had a different idea. He leased a piece of old military airstrip in Santa Ana, California. He painted a quarter-mile line. He put up timing equipment. He charged a small entry fee. And he said, race here, legally, safely. Come race here instead of the streets. And they came. The Santa Ana drags became ground zero for organized drag racing in America. And within months, strips were popping up all over the country. In Kansas, in Texas, in Ohio, in Florida. The National Hot Rod Association, the NHRA, was formed in 1951. Drag racing went from a back alley crime to an organized sport almost overnight. But here's the thing nobody talks about. When those first riders rolled up to those first drag strips looking for something fast, something that could win, many of them were already riding British motorcycles, and there was a very specific reason for that. You have to understand the global motorcycle landscape in the late 1940s. The American motorcycle industry had essentially two major players, Harley-Davidson and Indian. Harley was building big, heavy, low-revving V-twins. Beautiful machines, iconic machines, built for cruising on long American highways, but not built for raw, explosive acceleration off a standing start. Indian was in serious trouble. The company was struggling financially, making questionable engineering decisions, and would eventually fold in 1953. And then there were the British. Triumph, BSA, and Norton had spent decades building motorcycles for a completely different kind of rider. British roads were narrow and twisty. British riders needed bikes that were light, agile, and high-revving. The British motorcycle industry had developed some of the most technically advanced engines in the world. Parallel twins and singles that could rev to the moon and produced power in a way American V-twins simply couldn't match off the line. After the war, British manufacturers looked at America and saw an enormous hungry market. American soldiers had ridden British bikes during the war. They'd seen Triumphs and BSAs in action. They'd come home wanting more. British exporters began flooding the American market. Dealers opened up across the country, and the guys who bought these bikes discovered something almost immediately. They were fast. seriously fast. The Triumph Speed Twin had already changed the motorcycle world when it launched in 1937. Its parallel twin engine was a revelation: light, powerful, smooth. After the war, Triumph updated and evolved that formula. By the early 1950s, the Triumph Thunderbird 650 was one of the fastest production motorcycles money could buy anywhere on Earth. And then came the bike that changed everything. In 1956, Johnny Allen took a specially prepared Triumph 650 Streamliner to the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah. He set an unofficial land speed record of 214 miles per hour. 214 miles per hour on a motorcycle. That number and that achievement echoed around the entire motorcycle world, and Triumph, being the brilliant marketing operation that it was, decided to honor it. In 1959, they released a new top-of-the-line model. They called it the Bonneville, the T120 Bonneville, a 649cc parallel twin, high-compression pistons, twin amyl carburetors, a tuned exhaust. It was a motorcycle designed from the factory to go fast, and on the drag strips, it was devastating. The Bonneville could be purchased, brought to the strip with minimal preparation, and immediately be competitive against almost anything. With a few modifications, and the aftermarket parts business for Triumph was already booming. It became a weapon. But here's what people often miss about the Triumph Bonneville's success at the drag strip. It wasn't just about raw horsepower. It was about the whole package. While the Bonneville was light, significantly lighter than anything Harley-Davidson was producing at the time. In drag racing, weight is the enemy. Every pound you remove is free speed. The Bonneville's chassis was lean and purposeful handling. The frame and geometry allowed riders to get a clean, controlled launch. No wild handling at the line. No unpredictable behavior under full power. Tunability. The Triumph engine responded beautifully to modifications. You could pull the top end, swap cams, increase compression, rejet the carburetors, and find significant power gains. The engine was a platform, a foundation that skilled mechanics could build upon. And American mechanics were extremely skilled. The drag strip culture was, at its core, a mechanical culture. These were men who could take an engine apart in their driveway on a Friday night and have it back together and faster by Saturday morning. They understood what the Triumph engine was offering them, and they ran with it. By the late 1950s, Triumph-powered motorcycles were winning events all across the NHRA circuit, and Triumph wasn't the only British manufacturer having success. BSA stands for Birmingham Small Arms, and yes, the company originally made guns, weapons for the British military, but by the 20th century, they were making bicycles and then motorcycles, and by the post-war era, BSA was actually the largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world by volume. Let that sink in. The largest motorcycle manufacturer in the world was British, not Japanese, not American. British, and they were called the Birmingham Gun. BSA had a portfolio of machines that ranged from small commuter bikes to serious high-performance machines. The A10 Golden Flash was their flagship twin in the early 50s, a solid, reliable 650cc parallel twin that shared a lot of DNA with the Triumph format. Then came the A7 Shooting Star, then the DBD34 Gold Star. Ah, the Gold Star. Now here's a machine that deserves a chapter all on its own. The BSA Gold Star. The Goldie, as writers called it, was born from a very specific moment. In 1937, Wal Handley took a standard BSA Empire Star around the Brookland Circuit in England and lapped at over 100 miles per hour. The achievement earned him a Gold Star lapel pin from the factory. BSA named a special performance version of the bike after that moment. And over the following decades, the Gold Star became one of the most celebrated performance motorcycles Britain ever produced. By the 1950s, the Gold Star 500 with its beefy single-cylinder engine was an absolute animal in competition. At Daytona, in scrambles, in trials. And yes, on the drag strip, the Goldie was feared. The Gold Star was not a beginner's motorcycle. It was loud, aggressive, and demanded respect. The single-cylinder engine had a brutal power delivery. It would sit there doing nothing, and then suddenly, at the right RPM, wake up like something possessed and launch the rider forward with shocking force. On a drag strip, where that single explosive hit of power needed to land at exactly the right moment off the line, the Gold Star in the hands of a skilled rider was a serious threat to anyone. BSA also brought the A65 Lightning Twin to American shores in the early 1960s, and it became immediately popular with drag racers looking for twin-cylinder power in a lighter package than the Triumph. And the tuners, God bless the American tuners, found that BSA twins responded just as well to modification as Triumphs did. Hotter cams, bigger carbs, ported and polished heads. These men were artists working in aluminum. If Triumph was the working class hero and BSA was the workhorse, Norton was the aristocrat, the sophisticated Englishman who showed up at the drag strip and somehow looked better doing it than everyone else. Norton motorcycles out of Birmingham had built their reputation on road racing, specifically on the Isle of Man TT, the most demanding and dangerous road race in the world. Norton won that race more times than almost any other manufacturer. Their machines were refined. Their engineering was precise, and their handling was legendary. The Norton featherbed frame, introduced in 1950, was considered by many to be the greatest motorcycle chassis ever built. It gave the bike razor-sharp, neutral handling. It was the frame that the motorcycle industry spent the next 20 years trying to copy, and never quite matched. So what does a road racing champion do on a drag strip? At first glance, it seems like a mismatch. Drag racing is about raw power and straight-line acceleration. Road racing is about balance and cornering. Why would Norton even show up at the quarter mile? Because the Norton Dominator and later the Atlas had something important, an engine that could be made to produce serious horsepower. The 650cc parallel twin was a strong motor, and when American tuners got their hands on it, the results were impressive. Norton wasn't as dominant on the drag strips as Triumph or BSA. But they were present, they were competitive, and there were Norton-powered drag bikes that could beat anything at certain strips on certain nights. More importantly, Norton contributed something else to the British bike drag racing story: credibility. When people talked about British motorcycles in America, Norton's racing pedigree gave the entire British contingent a sense of legitimacy that went beyond the quarter mile. If Norton, world-class road racers, chose to build a motorcycle with an engine that could be adapted for drag racing, that said something about the fundamental quality of British motorcycle engineering. Now let's talk about the riders. Because machines don't win races, people do. The American drag racer of the 1950s was a very specific type of human being. He, and it was almost always a he in those days, was typically young, working class, mechanically obsessed, and completely fearless. He worked with his hands during the week. He wrenched on his bike in the evenings. And on weekends, he lined up at the strip and put everything on the line. Many of these men were veterans, men who had served in Korea, or were too young for World War II, but had grown up in that shadow. They carried a certain hardness, a certain hunger for intensity that peacetime life didn't always satisfy. The drag strip gave them that intensity. And the British bikes gave them the tools to compete without spending the kind of money that factory-backed teams had. Here's something crucial that's often overlooked. The British motorcycles were affordable. A working man could save up and buy a new Triumph or BSA. He could not necessarily afford to build a specialized American machine from scratch. The British bikes were competitive out of the box and became even more competitive with affordable, accessible modifications. This democratized drag racing in a way that nothing else did. It wasn't just rich guys with factory support. It was garage mechanics with a Triumph, a set of wrenches, and a burning desire to win. Some names became legends. Jack Chrisman, one of the most celebrated figures in early drag racing. He raced everything: cars, motorcycles, anything he could strap an engine to. He appeared at drag strips across California in the late 1950s, running against everything, including those twin Triumph motorcycle combos that were showing up with two engines bolted together. The twin-engine Triumph drag bikes deserve a special mention. When clever builders realized that one Triumph engine was fast, two must be faster. They began constructing machines with two complete Triumph engines, one behind the other, driving the same rear wheel through a shared transmission. These machines were sometimes called doubles, and they were absolutely insane. They were unstable, dangerous, hard to manage, and very, very fast. The Stage Fright was one of the most famous of these machines, a dual-engine Triumph drag bike built in Southern California in the early 1960s that became a legend at local strips. It represented everything about that era: creativity, bravery, absolute disregard for sensible engineering and raw speed. These were the men and the machines that made the era legendary. You cannot tell this story without talking about the places where it happened. The drag strips of this era were not fancy. They were not polished motorsport facilities with grandstands and hospitality suites and television cameras. They were strips of asphalt, or sometimes just packed earth, with a timing light at the end and a crowd of people who came to see something real. Santa Ana Drag Strip in California. Pomona Raceway. Lions Associated Drag Strip in Wilmington, California, known simply as the Lions. Cordova in Illinois. Great Lakes Dragaway in Wisconsin. Englishtown in New Jersey. Gainesville in Florida. These names were spoken with reverence by the men who raced at them. Each strip had its own personality, its own conditions, its own regulars. The pavement at one strip might be grip-friendly and allow a clean launch. Another might have a slippery surface near the line that punished any wheel spin. The riders who mastered these strips, who understood the conditions, who could launch consistently well every single time, those were the true champions. Technical ability was just as important as horsepower. And on those strips, through the late 1950s and into the 1960s, British motorcycles were a constant, dominant presence. The Lions Drag Strip in Wilmington, California became particularly legendary for motorcycle drag racing. The footage that survives from Lions, grainy, black and white, shot by enthusiasts with home movie cameras, shows triumph after BSA blasting down the strip. It shows crowds of people packed along the fence line, leaning forward, watching in awe. This was the heartbeat of American motorsport culture in that era. And British iron was right at the center of it. One of the most fascinating aspects of British bike dominance on American drag strips was what happened when American mechanics started modifying British engines. The British factories built excellent engines, but they built them for a global market, for reliability over long distances, for a variety of conditions. They did not build them specifically for a 10-second flat-out sprint down a quarter mile of asphalt. American tuners saw the potential and started exploring it. Cams were the first thing. Changing the camshaft profile altered when the valves opened and closed, how long they stayed open, and how far they opened. A more aggressive cam profile could dramatically change the power delivery of an engine, shifting it from a smooth, broad power band to a sharp, explosive hit that was perfect for drag racing. Compression ratios went up. Higher compression meant more power, but it also meant the engine was more sensitive to fuel quality and more prone to detonation. These tuners learned to walk that razor edge. Carburation was studied obsessively. The Amal carburetors that came on British bikes were good units, but tuners experimented constantly with jetting, with needle positions, with slide sizes. Getting the fuel mixture perfect for maximum power at wide open throttle was an art form. Porting and polishing the cylinder head, smoothing and reshaping the passages that carried the fuel-air mixture into the combustion chamber, could free up significant power by reducing turbulence and improving flow. Exhaust systems were rethought entirely. The stock exhaust pipes were replaced with open megaphone pipes, sometimes called drag pipes, that amplified the exhaust pulse to improve scavenging of spent gases from the cylinder. The sound was magnificent, loud, sharp, crackling. The sound of a properly tuned British twin on open pipes is something you never forget. And then there were the tires. Tire technology of the era was nothing like what we have today, and getting a good launch without spinning the rear wheel to uselessness was a constant challenge. Tuners experimented with tire compounds, with tire pressures, with softening and treating rubber to get more grip. The whole enterprise of making a British bike faster for the drag strip was a collaborative, community-driven effort. Tricks and techniques were shared between friends, between riders at the strip, between the pages of magazines like Cycle World and Hot Rod. Knowledge flowed freely, and the whole community benefited. And the result, a properly prepared Triumph or BSA in the hands of a skilled tuner, could be genuinely extraordinary. No story about British bikes ruling American drag strips is complete without acknowledging what ended it. In 1969, Honda released the CB750. 4 cylinders, 4 carburetors, an electric starter, and more power, from the factory than almost anything the British were offering. The CB 750 was not just a fast motorcycle. It was a technically sophisticated, reliable, well-finished, affordable motorcycle that arrived with the power already built in. You didn't need to be a master tuner to get performance out of it. You didn't need to spend your weekends in the garage with your hands covered in grease. You bought it, you rode it, and it was fast. The British motorcycle industry had been showing signs of stress for years before the CB 750 arrived. There were labor disputes, management problems, outdated factory practices. BSA and Triumph had actually merged their operations. Norton was struggling financially. The CB 750 broke the dam. Within a few years, Japanese manufacturers Honda, Kawasaki, Suzuki, Yamaha had transformed the motorcycle market entirely. Younger riders, new riders, riders who hadn't grown up in the culture of British iron gravitated toward the Japanese machines. They were faster, they were more reliable, they were easier to live with. On the drag strips, the Japanese bikes began winning more and more often. The era of British dominance was ending. But here is what you must understand, and what gets lost in the neat historical narrative of Japanese manufacturers coming in and conquering the market. The British bikes didn't lose because they were bad. They lost because the world changed around them. The industrial and management infrastructure that supported those great machines, Triumph, BSA, Norton, that infrastructure failed to adapt. The machines themselves, the engineering, the fundamental DNA of those parallel twin engines, that was sound. That was excellent. That was genuinely world-class, and the proof is in what happened afterward. BSA is gone. The original company collapsed in the early 1970s. Norton went through bankruptcy, rebirth, and a long, complicated saga that continues even now, but Triumph is still here. The company was revived in the 1980s under John Bloor, rebuilt from the ground up with modern engineering while honoring the heritage of the original brand. Today, Triumph Motorcycles in Hinckley, England makes some of the most respected performance motorcycles in the world. The Bonneville name lives on, still carried by modern machines that pay tribute to that original T120 that terrorized American drag strips more than 60 years ago, and the vintage machines themselves, the original Triumph Bonnevilles, the BSA Gold Stars, the Norton Dominators. They have become highly prized collector pieces. Beautifully restored examples sell for significant money at auction. Concours events around the world feature rows of gleaming British twins polished to perfection. But the most interesting part of the legacy is what still happens on the drag strips. There is an entire subculture of vintage motorcycle drag racing. Organizations like the AMDRA, the Antique Motorcycle Drag Racing Association, hold events where riders bring out period-correct machines from the 1950s and 1960s and race them exactly the way people raced them then. No modern tires, no electronic aids, just man, machine, and that quarter mile of asphalt. And at these events, you will see Triumph Bonnevilles and BSA Gold Stars and Norton Dominators still going down drag strips and still winning races. The machines that ruled the strips in their era can still run, still compete, still make the hair on your arms stand up when that twin-cylinder engine hits its power band and launches off the line. Some things age beautifully. British bikes from the golden era of drag racing are among them. So what do we take from all of this? The story of British bikes on American drag strips is a story about an unexpected collision of cultures. British engineering, forged in the narrow roads and industrial cities of England, met American ambition, creativity, and the desperate hunger for speed that a post-war generation carried inside them. And when those two things met, on those flat, sun-baked strips of asphalt in Southern California and Illinois and Florida and Texas, something remarkable happened. A Triumph built in Coventry became the fastest thing on a California drag strip. A BSA from Birmingham became the bike to beat in the American Midwest. Norton's engineering excellence, born from Isle of Man TT victories, found new expression on quarter-mile sprints. These were not just racing results. They were moments where two worlds connected, where the best of British engineering met the best of American mechanical ingenuity, where factory machines became something more through the skill and creativity of the people who worked on them. And when you look at photographs from that era, the sun-bleached strips, the packed crowds, the riders in their leather jackets and open-face helmets, the bikes gleaming in the California sun, you understand why people who were there remember it as something special, not just as racing, as a way of life. This was the era when British bikes ruled American drag strips, when Triumph, BSA, and Norton crossed an ocean and proved that the best motorcycles in the world at that moment in history were made in England. And nobody who was there, standing against that rope at Santa Ana or Lyons or Pomona, watching a Bonneville disappear down the quarter mile in a cloud of tire smoke and exhaust, nobody who was there ever forgot it. Thanks for riding with me through this one. If you know this era, if you've ridden these bikes, if you have a story, leave it down below. These stories deserve to be told. And if this one meant something to you, you know what to do.